Joining us at Inside Arabia to discuss freedom of press in the Arab world is Abdullah Alaoudh. He is a senior fellow at the Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding and also the son of Saudi scholar Salman Al-Awdah, who was arrested in 2017 in Saudi Arabia due to controversial tweets. We're so thankful to have you talking with us today. Obviously, we want to talk with you about the state of freedom of press in the Arab world. So how about we just jump right in and start there? How would you describe the state of press freedom in the Arab world today?
Well, I think it reached an unprecedented level of persecution, oppression, lack of basic freedom and liberties in each level of in terms of freedom of expression, in terms of freedom of right to assembly, the basic rights, generally human rights, women's rights, children's rights, in every level.
Okay. Do you see any countries that are like setting a standard for the Arab world as far as moving towards a more democratic state?
I think during the Arab Spring, there were upheavals in several countries. There were uprisings, there were revolutions, more or less, then coups, counter-revolutions as well. But aside from all that, I think at least Tunisia started that level of transition toward democracy. There were some, of course, bumps in the roads, but also Tunisia still struggles toward more democratic system. It at least established a basic system that guarantees rights, liberties, freedom of assembly, basic elections that are transparent and also overseen by the international community, by the international observers. So I think that is the example of Tunisia, the country where the first chant for freedom erupted in the Arab world and swept later to neighboring countries. It is the example of the transition toward democracy in the Arab world right now. So I think Tunisia is the answer. It's not perfect. It still has a lot of, especially economic challenges, but also it's much better than any other example in the transition toward democracy level.
Okay, thank you for that example. I'd like to go back to your first statement. You said in so many words that freedom of press is very restricted in the Arab world at large. Could you give some examples of how journalists, activists, or anyone who is somewhat of a public figure may be stifled or restricted in their speech?
I'll give you the most recent example. My friend Mohammed Sultan, who is based here in Washington, D.C., like us. Mohammed just filed a lawsuit against Hazem al-Biblawi, who was the first prime minister after the coup in 2015 in Egypt. And just days after he filed that lawsuit, there was a security raid on his house in Egypt. Two of his uncles were arrested. His family there were harassed. His father was in jail since 2015, and he's sentenced to life in prison. The whole family pays a heavy toll because of activism, because of the actions, because of this civil activism that their family members do abroad. So that's just the most recent example, and then we have other examples in other parts of the Arab world. And Saudi Arabia, like my country, is another case where we have been seeing a lot of unprecedented level of persecution. We have seen an unprecedented level of targeting families specifically. We have seen, for example, how the parents of Loujain al-Hudloul, the prominent feminist, are banned from traveling. That's one thing. Another thing, like 17 members of my own family are banned from traveling. We have seen the case of the former minister, Saad al-Jabri. Two of his kids, Sarah and Omar, were arrested just last month. And then they are held incommunicado to this point I'm speaking to you. They did not know if they are, his family, their families did not know if they are dead or alive until, so it's a systematic persecution that targets families, that tries to send a message to the community, to the family, that whatever your family member does outside to pressure for human rights, for basic liberties, you are going to pay the toll for. And therefore, that's why they try to pressure the family and intimidate them in order to pressure their sons or daughters or whoever family members are outside to stay silent, to kept quiet. That's their way of trying to intimidate activists.
Wow. Well, you've touched on how family members are targeted, and some family members of your family obviously have been targeted. Your father has been a big case, Salman Al-Awdah. So could you go into detail about his case, and what was it about his tweets and his comments on the blockade on Qatar that were considered so controversial there?
So my father is Salman Al-Awdah. He is a 63-year-old. He has been an intellectual Muslim scholar all his life. He has written several books that have been translated to so many languages, including English. He was in the 1990s, for example, one of the minds that demanded basic liberties and a consultative council that is representative of the Saudi society, and that did not take place. But instead, King Fahd at that time established a consultative council that was totally appointed by the king and controlled by the executive. Anyway, so he was demanding reforms since the 1990s. He was put in jail in the 1994 until 1999. And when he was released, the state at that time, the Saudi government, tolerated his activism and movement because he was spearheading the popular campaign against terrorism and extremism. And that's why they allowed that margin for him at that time, because they both were against, for example, Al-Qaeda, were against terrorists, were against extremist views. And because he held that moderate Islamic rhetoric, they needed that popular campaign against extremism at that time, especially in post 9/11 period, when the government at that time promised reforms, promised moderate Islam, promised margins for freedom and liberty. So anyway, during the Arab Spring, he supported the revolution in Egypt. He supported the revolution in Tunisia, and he wrote a book called On Revolution, Questions on Revolution, and was translated into English as well, in which he theorizes on how how politics should be presented and implemented in the Arab world, and especially in the Gulf, and how reforms should be implemented in order to include peoples of the Arab world, of the Gulf and the Arab world generally. And he, in that book, talked about how to, and in 2011, he spearheaded a campaign and a petition called Toward a State of Rights and Institutions. In that petition, It's a very small, brief, one page kind of petition in which they demanded, for example, an elected government, second, elected parliament, third, empowering women. They demanded protection of minorities. They demanded support for youths and economic diversity, and they demanded some kind of accountability and release of all political detainees and detainees of conscience. At that time, there was some kind of negotiation, and even some part of within the royal family agreed to that, and they thought it's the way forward in order to protect the system, protect the kingdom, is only to allow the only way is to allow for participatory politics. So anyway, fast forward, he was he was banned from traveling, and then when King Abdullah died, King Salman, the current king, came along. He promised some reforms, especially with that new reformist, crown prince, but that did not go well. So in 2017, he was asked to join the state's campaign against neighboring countries and Qatar as part of the state's agenda. He said, I would never tweet or do things just because you tell me to. He was one of the most popular figures on Twitter. He has like 13 to 14 million followers on Twitter. Was one of the most followed people in Saudi Arabia. So they asked him to tweet. He refused. And when he tweeted saying that may God harmonize between the hearts of the rulers for the best of their peoples, they considered it as a defiance. And hours after that tweet, he was arrested. My uncle tweeted 2 days after that about the arrest of my father. He was arrested as well. So the members of my family were banned from traveling. I tweeted. They harassed me. They suspended my passport. And then in 2018, just 3 weeks after, 3 weeks before the killing of Khashoggi, they transferred my father to court, and they demanded the death penalty against him on 37 charges, including corrupting the kingdom by seeking to transform the monarchy into a constitutional monarchy, inciting rebellion against the kingdom, disagreeing with the foreign policy of the state. That's another charge. Another charge is mocking the government achievements. Just imagine, that's a charge, mocking the government achievements. Another charge is having books that are banned in the kingdom, and some other charges. And the trial is still ongoing, but it's still there.
Wow, so your father's case is still ongoing. Have there been any updates?
Well, the most recent update was a pre-COVID-19 period where his trial was pending. So they did not specify, they did not schedule a hearing at that time. I don't know if they're gonna do that soon, or they're gonna just use that period to postpone the whole idea of the trial. So it's all up in the air right now.
What do you think it is about your father's stance or his, following that made the government target him or look to him as a threat in any kind of way?
That's a very interesting question. Well, I think he has qualities that they lack. One is the popular legitimacy. For example, when he signed the petition that I mentioned, 18,000 people were on board. 18,000 Saudi citizens were on board. A number that the government never gathered for their own projects and statements and government projects. So the idea is that he has that. Second, he combined two things. One is the Islamic background and learning and teaching that he has in his bone. He was taught, trained. He taught in Islamic universities and universities throughout Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. That's one thing. And keep in mind that the state always said that it's based on Islamic legitimacy, and that's why it gives the title of, for example, the guardian of the two holy mosques as part of the king's titles. So they claim that legitimacy. So my father has that. So with that, the other element is his embracement of reforms, democracy, real change in the kingdom. So they always use the state always try to, for example, set these two apart. They will always say, for example, the change is always through a tyrannical figure who will, has that magic wand and transform the whole state into heaven with the vision. And that's why, for example, they presented 2030 vision. So they would never accept inclusion, diversity. They would never accept popular participatory politics generally. Or they would say, for example, we are an Islamic country, we are different, we can't be this way. The democracy is for the West, is for the infidels, and we are different, and we're not going to accept liberties. Who would accept liberties for people to say whatever they want? They may say things against our religion or against our basic values. But my father, the rhetoric of my father challenges all that. He says that it's part of what he knows in Islam is to allow for basic freedoms. It's part of what he teaches in Islam is to promote moderate Islam against violence. It's part of what Islam is to support democracy, is to allow for participatory politics, is to include minorities, even non-Muslims, Muslims or non-Muslims alike, is to fight against discrimination, fight against racism, fight against, for example, the wages, the below minimum wage for workers in the kingdom, and that's part of why they fear him the most.
So you talked a little bit about the current leadership in Saudi Arabia. Obviously, this has been an issue that's been going on for some time, but how do you think the current leadership in Saudi Arabia is shaping the response to press freedom, freedom of speech? How has that changed the dynamic at all? And particularly with the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, how does this fit into his vision 2030?
Well, I think when the vision first were presented in 2016, it promised transparency. It promised diversifying the Saudi economy. It promised inclusion, and it never delivered any of these things. The oil price is, as you know, now in its worst times. The economy, the only thing that the vision did right now is to go to the citizens' pockets and take money from people, but we don't know where that goes. When the idea of taxes were presented first, I thought, well, when taxes were introduced in other parts of the world, in the West, the US here, in France, elsewhere, there was a saying that I think you are familiar with that says no taxation without representation. When you want to take money from the people, from the pocket of the people, they should know where this money goes. They should know how you're going to spend it. They should participate in the decision making of how this money should be distributed. So the idea of social justice, redistribution of wealth should be part of the process of introducing taxes. But what the vision did since 2016. And what MBS, the current Crown Prince, did is that he introduced taxes. While we used to be a rentier state that is based wholly on oil, the idea was to try to diversify the Saudi economy. Well, the only thing that they introduced and they were successful at is to tax the people, which is also like very wrong when you tax the people, but at the same time you do not allow these people to know where these taxes go and how they were spent or how they were distributed among people. So the vision actually was, added an insult to an injury by just going to a rentier state with that all, heavy package of corruption, of elite taking over every part of the Saudi society, and putting all that instead of in the hand of one family, it's in the hand of two people or one person, the de facto ruler. So, of course, it went from having a whole corrupted elite into one corrupted elite, but that one corrupted person did the whole job of corruption by, having a monopoly over wealth, over political decision making, over religious rhetoric, over social work, and over everything, basically. So that's the change that we have been seeing in the past 2 years. And also we use, for example, to know what the red line is. We were never democratic, that's for sure. But at least we used to have a margin that I just spoke about in the first part of this conversation. We used to know at least where the red line is, We used to know, for example, we used to expect who will be arrested and when and why. But right now, at this moment, we see a lot of people who are targeted just because they are families. We have seen a lot of people who were arrested just because they are rich. We have seen a lot of people who are targeted just because they are famous. And like just last month, we saw like four to six people very popular on social media and in Snapchat and Instagram and in fashion, Saudi fashionistas who were arrested just because they are famous.
Wow. I'd actually like to go back to another high-profile case that you mentioned, which is Jamal Khashoggi. One of his sons recently pardoned the people responsible for his assassination. What do you think his case signifies overall for the state of freedom of press in the Arab world, and particularly with his son's pardon? What do you think will be the next steps in his case?
When they first classified the case as qisas according to Saudi law, I'm an expert in Saudi law, and I graduated from law in Saudi Arabia, and I've filed many cases, won many cases in Saudi courts, and I've known many hundreds of judges. I've wrote to them many times. So knowing all that and seeing how they classified from the very beginning what the case is in Saudi Arabia, and classifying it as a qisas, as a retribution, was obvious for me from the very beginning that they wanted to go this route. Why? Because with the retribution classification, with classifying the case as qisas, it's part of the Saudi law and Islamic law is to allow that is applied in Saudi Arabia, is to allow even one family member to pardon the case and therefore close the case because now it's being pardoned. So they intentionally did not classify it, for example, as a political assassination, which should be the case from the very beginning. They did not classify it as something called ghila in Saudi law. Ghila means when you lower somebody into a place, into what was supposed to be a safe place, in order to kill him or her, that's just not just not just a regular kind of murder. It's a premeditated murder with planning, with people involved, with brains going into all that, and planning, and tickets, and private jets, using the space of the consulates. These all elements that should not make it just a regular second-degree murder. It's something that is a premeditated murder with planning put in there, with people involved, and people from the security apparatuses in Saudi Arabia involved, with intelligence agents, Saudi intelligence agents involved, with 2 private jets from the Saudi government, owned by the Saudi government, involved. This should not be just simply classified as qisas, because it was obvious from the very beginning, is to make it a private matter between the family of Khashoggi and the victim. The family of Khashoggi and the defendants, the killers of Khashoggi. So why? Because they know they control the family. One. Second, they showered the family with reportedly with money. Even reports from the New York Times and Washington Post talked about that, with money and all that, in order to put them under control. And they intimidated the family as well. So they are under intimidation, control, and money. And therefore, their best choice is to make it a private matter, and to close the case, and to show the world that they are having some trial of some sort, but at the same time a trial that they know can control, and an outcome that they can predict, and make sure it goes the way they want. And that's what happened, basically. So I guess for now, the only thing left is to the only thing left that we expect that they can do is to let these defendants free. And I think it's going to happen in one way or another, because they want to protect those who did the dirty work for the person who not just knew but also ordered the killing. That's the only way to protect him, is to not put these people into death, because for the state to put these people into death, it means to threaten everybody who will do another dirty work for the government, that they will face the same fate. So they don't want to go this route.
It seems like these are cases that have so many different implications. So I'm wondering, particularly as someone who is a public figure, writer, you share your thoughts with your online following. How does this affect your work, and how do you think other people who are involved in journalism in Saudi Arabia in particular are affected by these cases?
Well, I think the idea of killing Jamal Khashoggi in the watch of the world was to send a strong message of intimidation and threat to all journalists, to all people working in the public sphere, to all activists, academics, all people who can criticize, who have the pen to and dare to criticize the government. That was the message, and the idea here was, for them, if you are inside, we're gonna arrest you. If you are outside, we're gonna lower you. If we can't reach you, we're gonna reach your family. If we can't reach your family, we're gonna character assassinate you. We're gonna go after you on Twitter, Facebook. We're gonna, use the Saudi bots. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Electronic flies, the automated accounts against you, character assassinate you. We're gonna file fake complaints against you to the Interpol, to international organizations. We're gonna we're gonna hack you. And I think you may have seen some reports about how the Saudi government used NSO, an Israeli company, an Israeli program, in order to hack Saudi activists' cell phones and laptops. And so they want to send a message that we will know what you do, whatever you do. We will go after you. We will go after your cell phone. We will go after your family. We will go after your character. We will go after your account on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. We will not leave any stone unturned, because that's because you go after us. We will make you pay for whatever you say. We will make you pay for whatever you do outside. In the past, they used to go after people inside. They will wait for you to come, or they will use their own tricks to let you come, and then they arrest you, for example, and they may persecute you, they may torture you. But now it's a different thing. They reach people outside. They go beyond borders. Now they have the long arm, they call it right now. They try to go after people in Canada. They hacked my friend's cell phone, Omar Abdulaziz, in Canada. And then they lower Jamal Khashoggi into the council and kill him there. They go after the families here and there. There are even reports of them being, having surveillance over Khadija, the fiancée of Khashoggi, in London. So they go London. They go, and there is even a Saudi person who was, a case in I think Los Angeles, who was told by the FBI that he may face some threats from the family, because his family sent somebody, to take him back to Saudi Arabia. So now they are reaching the U.S., they're reaching Canada, they're reaching London, they're reaching Turkey, the Turkish and the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. So the idea here is that it's like the whole world is a theater for their dirty operations and dirty war.
Wow. So you in particular, how does this change the way that you approach your work at all? Do you feel like you have to censor yourself in any way? Do you fear that the things that you say or post can be held against you in any way?
Well, I think I went way beyond the point of return. I made up my mind a long time ago. I mean, like not a long time ago, but at least years ago, that it's there is no way of keeping quiet and silent, because keeping silent is like rewarding them for the persecution that they do. Keeping quiet is actually rewarding the tyrants and dictators for their bad behaviors and for their persecution and going after you and your family and everybody else. It's for me. It's a way of trying to make the tyrants pay for all the bad works that they do, instead of rewarding them for what they do by keeping quiet and keeping silent. So I'm not gonna keep silent just because they threaten and intimidate and pressure and suspend my passport and froze my account. Now, these things are not gonna keep me quiet. What's gonna keep me it just will fuel my story. It will give me more materials to talk about these practices. It will just give me another example of showing the world how tyranny works, and therefore we're gonna fight it until we have basic freedoms and liberties.
To touch on that a little further, talking about how to move towards a state where there is freedom of press, what role do you think the international community plays, particularly the United States, in supporting or advocating for freedom of press, freedom of speech in the Arab world, particularly Saudi Arabia?
Well, one thing is that keep in mind that without the protection and the help of the US particularly, MBS would not have been existed. MBS would not have existed. At one point, he sought the protection of Jared Kushner and Trump. When the killing of Jamal Khashoggi took place, he reminded the US administration that they had huge deals, arms sales, they had billions, and we never know about these numbers and the accuracy of these numbers, billions of dollars of deals, worth of deals, arms sales between the US and the Saudi government. Without the US protection, the Yemen, the war in Yemen would not have taken place. Would not have taken place. It's the behavior generally, and even the Intercept once reported that when the Ritz-Carlton purge took place, the purge against businessmen, business women, and against royals in Saudi, when that took place, just 2 days, a report talked about a communication between Jared Kushner and MBS 2 days just before that purge happened. And in that report, it was said that Jared Kushner tipped off MBS with the names within the royal family and the businessmen who criticized MBS or did not like him. I don't know how accurate the report was, but what we all know for sure is that after the killing of Khashoggi, we have seen how the U.S. Administration protected MBS and how Trump issued that statement when he said the world is a dangerous place, and we don't know about this guy, like this Khashoggi guy, and he may be a Muslim brother or maybe a dissident, and the Saudi government told me he's a dissident, and he's not a U.S. citizen, and that did not happen in a U.S. soil. So he made up all these excuses in order to let the killers off the hook and let MBS off the hook, and that's just silly and crazy. And that's one thing, is to stop protecting these tyrants and stop protecting these dictators. That's the first thing that they can do, and to make any arms sales conditional on the fact that they cannot be used against civilians in Yemen. They cannot be used against its own people in Saudi Arabia. They cannot be used to persecute people or to harm them in any way. Third thing is to pressure the Saudi government to release. That's one way, is to show how your pressure works, how your leverage with the Saudi government works, is by pressuring the Saudi government to release all political prisoners and detainees, across ideological differences, sectarian differences, regional differences, from all parts of the Saudi society, in order to make Saudi Arabia a place where people can really express themselves without being threatened or intimidated.
I want to shift gears just slightly, talking about the role of the United States. Within the United States, Islamophobia has been a hot topic for a long time. How do you feel the U.S. alliances or connections with other countries in the Arab world, such as UAE, either influences or takes away from this idea of Islamophobia in the United States? Does it help promote it in any way?
Well, yeah, I think so. There is like there was a piece by Ula Salim in the foreign policy about that you know dirty alliance between Islamophobes in the U.S. and Islamophobes at home in Saudi Arabia, the Gulf generally, because it started again during Arab Spring when the UAE and Saudi Arabia tried to paint these uprisings and these revolutions and these chants for democracy and freedoms as Islamists who are extremists, and to try to paint them as people who are against the West and all that. And therefore, they found an alliance with the Islamophobes in the West, who will also crush any democratic chant if that means allowing all people, including Muslims and religious people, to be part of the society and to be part of the inclusive process. So they found they found themselves in alliance with, or actually they found an alliance with an Islamophobic force here in the U.S. And it's not surprising when you see, for example, Steve Bannon being an advisor to people very close to MBZ, and when you found, for example, people who have like Walid Faris, who has a long history of being an Islamophobic and racist, and being he was even implicated reportedly in the civil war in Lebanon against other factions based on sectarian drives. Walid Faris now is advising Trump on the Middle East and how the Middle East should be run. Walid Faris is shaping how the Trump administration should see the Middle East. That's the alliance, and that's why you see the same administration that once wanted to ban Muslims from entering the U.S. is now supporting MBS and MBZ and CC and all these people. That's the same administration that, for example, when Michael Flynn said, for example, once that Islam is like cancer in the U.S., was an advisor, a very close advisor, and now then Trump tried to protect him against, protect him when he admitted it that he lied to the FBI a couple months ago. So it's a systematic anti-phobic alliance that wants to shape the Middle East now, and wants to present, for example, MBZ and MBS as the solution. Because with MBZ and MBS, there's no democracy, there's autocracy, dictatorship, but at the same time, we protect you from the people. We protect you from democracy, because the people are dangerous. The people can be Muslims who practice their religion. People can say they can establish their parties and multi-party system. So you guys do not want that, because with us we can do a very quick and easy arms sales. When we have a representative parliament, they may make it more bureaucratic, and they may have questions, and they may watch you and have you accountable for the sales and some corrupted commissions here and there. So it's easier to deal with us. That's the message that MBZ, MBS, CC, and alike are sending to their similar minds and counterparts in the US and in the West generally that we are the best, people to deal with, and the easiest way to deal with, because we both share the same things. You guys wanna, go after Muslims in your own countries. Well, we'll support you in every way. I mean, just imagine if the UAE designated major Muslim organizations and associations here in the US as terrorist organizations that the US itself did not recognize it as such. So it's like they're saying to the US, you are not Islamophobic enough, it's just crazy.
Wow. Abdullah, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on these very complex topics. Before we wrap up, are there any final thoughts that you have?
No, I just want to thank Inside Arabia. I want to thank you particularly for the very interesting interview and conversation. And I hope we can have more like this.
Thank you. We're pleased to speak with you, and we're in DC too. So hopefully, when things open back up, you can stop by and visit us one day.
Absolutely.